Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about a really important and interesting um, case that is going to be making its way up to the Supreme Court. Okay, it's nowhere near it yet, but it's going to end up there. And this case will be challenging the existence of the Federal Reserve as an independent agency. Okay, so the issue here is that the Constitution authorizes three branches of government, right? Executive, legislative, and judiciary. Okay, it does not authorize a fourth branch of government, right? Because that's what the Federal Reserve is, in effect, if they are an independent agency, right? They are a fourth branch of government. So I've never considered this, right? And now, for those of you that don't know, right, my background's accounting, right? So before I started wearing these goofy hats and spending my days outdoors shooting and training people, right, I did many years of accounting, right? I went to college some 35 plus years ago, took accounting classes, economics classes, studied all about the Federal Reserve and the banking system, they always said Federal Reserve independent agency set up by Congress, all right? But the thing that I never stopped to question is, by what right does Congress set up an independent agency, right? Congress has exceeded its authority. Congress doesn't get to set up a fourth branch of government, okay? So yeah, they basically can make the laws, right? Congress makes the laws, President enforces them, Supreme Court judges the constitutionality of laws, but there's no place in the Constitution that says anything about independent agencies. Or any agencies would basically fall under the executive branch, right? And that's it. There's no further debate on that issue. That's what the Constitution says. So yeah, there's no question that when Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, right, they intended the Federal Reserve to be an independent agency, but again, they exceeded their authority. So this is not something I've ever considered. Now, the person that kind of put me onto this idea is Mark Smith over at the Four Boxes Diner, and I've mentioned this guy many times before in his channel. If you're interested in the constitutionality of gun laws, Second Amendment, you have to follow this guy's channel. I mean, this guy is a constitutional scholar, but beyond that, he speaks in front of the Federalist Society. So you've got judges and high-end lawyers that actually listen to this guy. So that's the guy to follow, right? Mark Smith, Four Boxes Diner. You should be subscribed to that. But in this video, basically, I just want to give you guys a summary of what he said. And it was like, he's mentioned it before, right? But now the challenge has actually happened, okay? And the way this has come up is one of the Federal Reserve governors, right? Apparently, I think it's a woman. She's being accused of some crime, and Trump wants to fire her. Or actually, he has fired her. So Trump fired her. She says, "I'm not leaving. You can't fire me because I work for an independent agency, i.e., the fourth branch of government. So you can't fire me." So now, that's the vehicle by which this will end up in front of the Supreme Court. And the way this is, I think Trump kind of set this up in such a way, because here's the thing with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court looks at the constitutionality of laws, but they also kind of look at the circumstances. So this is a case that the Supreme Court will have to accept, right? Because basically basically you have this conflict within the government that has to be resolved, right? So this is not something they can kind of push off like they do with the most Second Amendment and First Amendment cases. They can't push this off. This they will have to take. And the circumstances of this is you've got a Federal Reserve governor, a person working for the Federal Reserve, who's basically there's a lot of evidence that she's been doing, that she's corrupt, right? That she's been doing some bad things, that she's corrupt. So those are the circumstances. So now this case goes in front of the Supreme Court. So now they've got a case that challenges the existence of a fourth branch of government, but also wrapped up in that is this person that's basically been accused of corruption, and apparently there's significant evidence. So it kind of makes it easier for them to say that, yeah, there definitely shouldn't be a fourth branch of government. Okay, so this is like really interesting, because the Federal Reserve has been around for a long time, right? Long before I was born. So it's kind of like, at this point, it's kind of like it's part of the I mean, it's part of the government, really, right? It's part of the way the American government functions, right? So if the Supreme Court goes against this, they're essentially like ripping out like a fourth branch of government that's been part of the system for such a long time. So this is extremely interesting. So this is something that you guys should follow, okay? And again, I'm not the person that's going to give you the details. I mean, I can't even remember this woman's name, right? So I mean, I don't care what her name is, and I don't, you know, like, because I'm really not interested so much in that aspect of this. I'm interested in the aspect of the constitutionality of the existence of the entire Federal Reserve is in question here, right? Can it exist as an independent agency? So far, from what we have seen with some other cases regarding the Supreme Court, they seem to be going in the direction that no, there's only 3 branches of government, and and that's it. Here's the thing, like with John Roberts, right? Chief Justice John Roberts, it's become pretty clear at this point that he really doesn't like Second Amendment cases, right? But he does like cases that question the structure of the government, okay, and the independence and the division between the branches. That is something that is extremely interesting to him, and that's something that he's definitely gonna want to get involved with, right? Sooner rather than later. So this is going to be really interesting. I mean, what the way this. I mean, I have no idea what comes out the other end of this, right? Because the Federal Reserve has been acting as a fourth branch of government for so long. It's like, when you pull that out, what do you have left? Okay, and I imagine the way it would work is basically the Congress would have to, for example, vote on an interest rate, right? Pass it, and then the president would enforce it, right? The Federal Reserve can still exist as an agency, but let's say Congress would have to actually vote on an interest rate, and then the Federal Reserve would enforce it under the direction of the executive branch. Okay, so that's how I kind of see that working out. So the question now becomes, how did we get to this, right? How did we get to this? The way that we got to this is basically through abuse of power. Same thing with USAID, right? Which has been not completely dismantled, but it's in tatters. Okay, essentially defunded, right? The reason why it got to that point is because of abuse, right? USAID was essentially being used to finance the Democrat Party. Okay, that's how it was being used, through back doors, right? So what would happen is USAID would give money to certain contractors and businesses, etc., and then they would take that money and then make a generous donation back to the Democrat Party or people that running as Democrats. So Republicans finally caught wind of this, and they said, hey, best way to shut down the Democrat Party financing is to shut down USAID, right? So that's how. So same thing is kind of happening here with the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve has pretty much been very much Democrat Party leaning for a very long time. They did everything that they could to help Biden. They're doing everything that they can to hurt Trump. Okay, so that's gonna naturally get underneath Trump's skin. He's telling them that they should lower interest rates. They're refusing to do so, right? So now that's making him, want to investigate them further. And through the course of that investigation, right, because now they've, like, under his microscope, he's finding that, hey, the chairman, for example, has wasted a whole bunch of money, on some building in Washington that he was trying to, a palace that he was trying to build for the Federal Reserve, right? So he's found that a whole bunch of money has been wasted there, and he's found that, you got this lady, Federal Reserve Governor, I'm guessing that's her title, who's corrupt, and I don't remember. I did hear the details, but I didn't remember the details because, again, it's just not that important to me. What is important is the overall thing here of of challenging the existence of the fourth branch of government. Okay? Now, again, going back to how we got here, right? The reason why we got here is because of this insane money printing, electronic money printing that's going on. Okay, so we're up to $37 trillion in debt, which means that the interest, like every 3 months, $1 trillion of interest is added every 3 months. So that works out to something like $4 trillion a year in interest, right? $4 trillion a year in interest because of this national debt. Well, the entire revenue of the U.S. government is $6 trillion. Okay, so of the $6 trillion, right? Of the $6 trillion, 4 of that is just interest on this debt. So at this point, like, I mean, it's obviously this system is collapsing. It just can't continue this way. So, I mean, Trump tried to postpone it by telling him, listen, lower the interest rates so that the interest is not $1 trillion every 3 months, right? They refused to do it because they believe that would help him, that would help his economy. So again, this is how we got here. So now, as far as the national debt, just to put things in perspective, the number trillion is an insanely large number. Okay, a million seconds is a week. A billion seconds is 31 years. Okay, a trillion seconds is 31,000 years. So the number trillion is an astronomical number. We don't talk in trillions unless we're talking about like molecules or stars or grain of sand. Okay. There's no such thing as $1 trillion, right? There's nobody in the universe for the U.S. government to borrow $1 trillion from, right? So again, the entire revenue of the United States government is $6 trillion. So how did they go adding $1 trillion of interest every 3 months? That's insane, okay? And also that $37 trillion represents half of the debt, of the dollar debt in the entire world. So if you take all the banks in the world, right? Because remember, there's more U.S. dollars outside the United States than inside the United States. If you go to all the banks in the world and you total up all the debt, right? All the U.S. dollar debt, right? It's going to come out to, I guess, some $90 trillion, right? So the $37 trillion is a little bit less than half of it. So the fact that the government has become half of the debt is basically the point where it's obvious that it's going to collapse. Okay, so basically our money system is set up as a Ponzi scheme. Okay, I mean, that's just how it's neither bad or good. That's just how it was set up. So the way it works is when money is borrowed, right? When you go to get a mortgage on your house, the bank electronically creates that money. They're allowed to, right? So you put up an asset, right? They take the deed to your house, right? And if let's say you take a $200,000 mortgage, they use the deed of your house to create money, and your house is the backing for that money. So it's no different than if you give them a house or if you have a gold mine and you give them gold. We have an asset-based system, right? So the banks use assets to create money, right? You give them the money in the form of a deed, all right? And they create money, but they do not create the interest, right? So if you take out a $200,000 loan, you got to pay back $300,000, right? So where's that extra $100,000 got to come from, right? So remember, everybody across the board, let's say everybody in my generation is getting a $200,000 loan, right? We all have to pay back $300,000. So there's more debt than there's money available to pay that debt. So what happens is my generation is depending on the next generation after us, the following year, to come in and take out loans of equal amounts to create more money, so we can, we can basically pay back our principal plus interest. Okay, so we are depending on the following generation coming in and making loans of the same size in order to create more money. Okay, the problem here is that the federal government is part of this system, and when they create money, right, they're creating this debt that they're calling. In reality, they're just diluting the existing money. But the problem is that there's nobody of the equal size to the U.S. government to come in and keep this Ponzi scheme going, right? So the only body that can continue this Ponzi scheme is the U.S. government themselves. So they have to continually, borrow money, or in this case, create money electronically, in order to keep it going, right? So that's the nature of the Ponzi scheme. And at this point, where everybody's like, wait a second, $1 trillion of interest every 3 months is insane. At this point, everybody's saying, hey, this is obviously a Ponzi scheme. It can't go on indefinitely, and this is what's putting strain on this entire system, right? Because now everybody's kind of like looking to get out, and that's why the value, the price of gold has gone up in the spot market, because everybody's looking for some alternative. Okay, so anyway, it'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out. Like I said, the source where I got my information from, as far as the Lawshield 4 boxes diner, Mark Smith. Definitely subscribe to his channel. Drop some comments because it helps push the algorithm. I'll talk to you all soon.